room full of people who believe in working to make our world a more welcoming place for all. That's an honor and privilege of my job, and I don't take it lightly. This summit began as an idea, and I'm grateful to Dr. John Dozier for allowing me to take that thought and turn it into this. When I took this position, I knew that there were many people who were already on the ground trying to help our state heal. I just wanted to help bring them all together. I often say that we're all trying to get to the same place, but we're just taking different cars. Today, we can get on the bus, and writing that didn't know that we're going to have shuttle issues. Today is an opportunity for us to learn from each other, gather some tips and tricks on how we can begin or continue the important dialogues that are needed in each of our communities. Think of today as a seed that will grow equity and social justice with enough care and attention. I know that sometimes it seems that we're constantly just preaching to the choir. Well, choir, today I'm charging you with going out and building your own churches. If each of us vows to have one hard discussion with someone that we disagree with in the coming year, we will be that much closer to what Dr. King called the beloved community. This morning's panel is focused on work being done by people in universities, and this afternoon we'll hear about work being done in communities. It's important that these conversations happen together. Today marks the first time that academics and activists have formally come together to share strengths. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors. Without them, this would not be possible. Children's Trust South Carolina, the Center for Civil Rights History and Research, the Arnold School of Public Health, and the REI Learning Collaborative. Each of you should have gotten a Post-it in August of 2012. He researches and teaches broadly in the areas of African American politics, urban politics, and public policy, as well as citizen activism and social movements. And he was one of the first cohort to go through the welcome table here at University of South Carolina, and I thought there'd be no one better than Dr. Shaw to moderate a panel of academics working for community healing. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's a great pleasure to join you, and particularly a great honor to be asked to moderate this first panel. Professor Gunter has already made reference to an important civil rights image and vessel of going out to build your own churches, and in the spirit of continuing that narrative, history and legacy of the civil rights movement, the Freedom Riders are on their way. So I want to just give brief introductions to our panelists. And forgive me, my eyes get worse and my screens get smaller. Either I should increase my screens or get thicker glasses. But anyway, so joining us today are Sherry Williams, Bobby Luckett, Jody Usher, and Robert Reinhardt. Sherry Williams is an assistant professor in the School of Communications at American University. Williams earned a PhD in mass communications and an MA in magazine, newspaper, and online journalism at Syracuse University, SI, Newhouse Public School of Communications. She also earned a BA in English with a concentration in journalism at Jackson State University. At the intersection of social media, social justice, reality, television, mass media, and how people of color use and are represented by these mediums is where you'll find Dr. Sherry Williams. Williams has a popular interest in how Black people's use of social media is changing social justice in the entertainment industry, especially television. She's also interested in how studies have marginalized people, especially Black women, and are represented in the media. national media outlets, including CNN, USA Today, the Smithsonian Magazine, and Vice, interviewed Williams for her social media expertise. She was named one of the NBC BLK's Fierce Black Feminists, You Should Know. For a decade, Williams Luckett received his BA in political science from Yale University and his PhD from the University of Georgia with a focus on modern civil rights history. A native Mississippian, he returned home where he is a tenured associate professor of history and director of the Margaret Walker Center for the Study of the African American Experience at Jackson State University. His book, Joe T. Patterson and the White South's Dilemma, Evolving Resistance of a Black Advancement, was published by the University of Press of Mississippi. Along with several publications and presentations at numerous academic conferences, he has appeared in documentaries, including the Independent Lens, Film Spies of Mississippi, as well as An Ordinary Hero from the Life of Joe Mulholland. He is an advisory member of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, and he is on the board of directors of the Common Cause Mississippi and the Association of African American Museums. In 2017, Mayor Chokwe Antor Lumumba appointed him to the board of trustees of Jackson Public Schools, and he has 3 children, Silas, Hazel, and Flip. Welcome, brother. Jody Usher. Jody Usher is the associate campus minister at Clemson University, the senior lay leader of Peace Church, United Church of Christ in Clemson. Jody Usher currently holds 2 positions at Clemson University. She's both a senior citizen and student and an associate campus minister. Telling and remembrance. Jody will tell us more about the unique method of introducing students to Clemson's history of race. Retired Emory University administrator, Jody completed her multifaceted career at Emory University in 2011, and she and her spouse, Carol Mowat, moved to Anderson, South Carolina. The magnets that drew them from Atlanta are 3 grandchildren who live in upstate and love their Grammys. And after her earning a doctorate in cognitive psychology, Jody served as an assistant dean in 3 of Emory's 9 schools, Emory College, the Graduate School, and the School of Public Health. And her strong interest in Indian racism has also placed her in the University President's Office for 2 university diversity projects involving U.S. and Emory race history. Welcome very much. All right. And my apologies to Assistant Dean Robert Reinhardt. I'm giving an entirely too short introduction, but I will let him further introduce himself because he is our Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at the University of South Carolina School of Medicine, and I'll let him introduce a little bit more. So if you would, join me in thanking again the panel for joining us this morning. So again, as Professor Gunter has said, our charge this morning is to talk about questions of diversity and inclusion in university and college environments. And so I'll ask each of our panelists to take about 10 to 12 minutes of introduction. We'll get into a Q&A session and then and get some interesting exchange for the rest of our panel. Okay, and we'll just go in order of presentation. So Sherry Williams, if you take it away. And you can sit at the table or you can come up here.
I need to go through some slides.
Feel free. Feel free.
I don't know if I should come over here.
Yeah, that would be just fine.
Okay. So, sir, is this what I use right here? This one? Okay. We can write from here, this one. Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for having me here. Before we get started and while he's pulling up the slides, I just want to say that I totally applaud and am so grateful not only to be here, but also to know Dr. Jennifer Gunter, who I have known for at least 18 years, probably a little bit more, when I was a student at Jackson State and also working at newspapers in Mississippi. We came to know each other, and I'm really proud of the work that she and her colleagues are doing here, and I was really happy to be invited because it not only gave me an opportunity to talk about my work, but also to see an old and cherished friend, and being connected to all these folks who have Mississippi roots is such a great treat for me. So, since we started a little bit late, I need to do a condensed version of this presentation, so I just started my stopwatch. So what I'm going to talk about here is this project that I did through the Anna Julia Cooper Center at Wake Forest University, and I'm a professor at American University. So we wanted to really put Black students and their experiences at the center of our work, because we know that when folks are talking about millennials and Generation Xers, I don't know what's going on with this feedback, but I'm gonna keep going. When people are talking about millennials and the Generation Zers, or whatever the ones after them are called, the default person who they talk about in terms of millennials is pretty much probably a young white man. They're really not interrogating the experiences of young students of color. And this is a group that not only is growing up in a time of a lot of change and technological advances, but we all know from what we see and what we experience, there's a considerable amount of racial strife here. So I am of the belief that storytelling is a form of liberation, and it can get us closer to the truth and closer to justice. And I believe that journalism is an important way to do that. We know that former Washington Post president and publisher Philip Graham said journalism is the first rough draft of history. So what we wanted to do is be that rough draft of history, but not only just record what's going on, but also have the students do it. So we know that there has been a considerable amount of racial strife on college campuses, from the stabbing of what is his name? I'm forgetting his name really quickly. The University of Maryland student on the University of Maryland campus, on my campus, at American University, when we had the first Black woman student body president elected, that her presidency was greeted with nooses and bananas were strung around campus. She was a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, which is a traditionally Black sorority, and they put AKA on bananas and strung those around campus. When I started there last fall, there were Confederate flags and cotton stalks pasted around campus. So we know that there have been a considerable amount of racial acts that have happened. And we also know, again, back in 2015, that the University of Missouri students really took over the campus and talked about some of the racial inequities there, and that led to the president and others resigning. So that is the genesis of Black on Campus. So because Melissa Harris Perry and I, who's a former MSNBC host and professor who runs the Anna Julia Cooper Center, where I did a postdoc, both of us believe strongly that journalism is important in terms of recording social justice and also moving closer to the truth. So what we wanted to do is center Black students' experiences. So we did a national call to try to get 5 students to come together and write about what is it like to be a Black student on campus. So we see that there has been some media coverage, but it is older people writing about what's going on with young people. So let's have the young people write about their experience themselves. So that's what we wanted to do. Now, before we did a partnership with Elle.com, the website that's the sister partner to Elle Magazine, and we only had 5 students. We plan to do that again with this partnership with The Nation magazine, only had 5 students. But we had had more than 100 students apply for this project from across the country, and we were so impressed with the applications that we got down. We narrowed them down to 10, so we actually doubled the cohort and our expectations because we really wanted to make sure that we had students from across the country. So here are all of our fellows. We have students from HBCUs, from PWIs, we have students from the DMV area where I am, we have students from the Deep South, from the Midwest, the Great Plains states, out in Arizona. We have students from across the country to chronicle what's going on with Black students on college campuses. So these are all of the fellows that we have here. So what we did was we trained the students. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Ida B. Wells, famous Black journalist who chronicled a lot of the injustices that happened here in the United States in the 1800s and 1900s. There is a group that runs the Ida B. Wells Society, which is a group of Black journalists who run this nonprofit where they train people how to do investigative journalism. So we got them to do a training with our students. We also did weekly trainings with our students. We met, even though we had students from across the country, we had these WebEx meetings, so we had video meetings every Sunday at 7 p.m. I mean, who wants to meet on Sunday at 7 p.m.? Not me. But because we had students from across the country and we're working with like 2 or 3 different time zones, that's when we had to meet. So we would actually do instruction then too about how to write a lead, how to write a nut graph, how to, the best tactics for interviewing and strategies for story structure, all that kind of stuff. So we really wanted to make sure that during this 6-month process that these students really had some strong journalism skills so they could really tell some important narratives. So one of the things that we wanted to do again was kind of just disrupt the idea of who college students are, because when people do think of college students, they typically think of white students. And when they think of young people, they think of their stories not necessarily being worthy of being told, because we know that there are these stereotypes of people thinking that millennials are just entitled and lazy and just want things to come easy for them and all that kind of stuff. And it was really funny, I was talking to someone about this project, a group of people, and they were like, well, what's so much harder about being a Black college student today than during the segregation era, like when we were the first to desegregate our schools. And I was saying that the point of this project is not to say that it is harder to be a Black college student today than it was back then, but the thing is, we know what it was like for you, because there were newspaper articles, there are documentaries, there are books that have already chronicled that. There are things that are going on with basically your grandkids now that we don't necessarily know about, and it is important for them to chronicle their stories and actually record them so that we do know what's going on, and so that we know that in certain instances and ways that there hasn't been a lot that has changed. So we also wanted to talk about ways in which privilege operates and does not operate among Black college students. I'm trying to hurry up too, y'all, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to get this. But one of the things that we really wanted to do was use their lived experience to inform their journalism, because who is more of an expert on what it's like to be a Black college student today than Black college students? So that is the main thing that we wanted to do with these students. And so what we did with Aaron, for example, Aaron wrote a personal essay that ran all of these stories, by the way, ran on thenation.com. And we know The Nation is a national magazine that also has a website that has done a really great job of chronicling social justice and injustice for decades. So Aaron, in his story, he wrote about how poverty and the lack of wealth and wealth disparities have affected his ability to go to college, and how when he first got to New York City to go to NYU to pursue a master's degree in journalism, he was actually homeless for a minute, and he was able to chronicle that. Deja is someone who attends Xavier University in Louisiana, and she just noticed that there were more white students on campus, so she wanted to write about that. So basically what we wanted to do was remedy injustice through reporting. I got the 5-minute mark, so I'm just gonna move on and just kind of condense and tell you about some of the stories that we wrote about. So one thing that I thought was really important, one story that was really important, was one that Lauren Lumpkin and Devin Cole wrote together. So they talked about how there have been like these decades centuries of systemic racism that have operated in some of these institutions that has really not only prevented Black students and students of color from going to college in the first place, but then when they've gotten there, they've had some really serious hurdles to go through. And so students are not only trying to get an education for it like everybody else, but they're also trying to help to move these campuses along in ways that they were basically not only being students, but being student affairs workers, being curriculum advisors, doing all of this activist work, and that was taking a toll on students. So they wrote a story about that. So when we talk about this college campus rape epidemic, we don't necessarily talk about what happens with women of color, and especially on Black college campuses. So we had one student write about that, but we kicked off the series with a really important story written by Alexis Gravely, who was a student at the University of Virginia, and she talked about how when students came back to school after that Unite the Right rally, I mean, if you're a freshman who is going to the University of Virginia, or even if you're a returning student, after you see people walking on, white nationalists walking on your campus with tiki torches, do you even want to go back to school? You know, how do you feel about being on that campus? How do you feel about pursuing your education? So she wrote a story about the mental health fallout that Black students experienced after that. So we had all of the students wrote stories, and they wrote about their experiences. And I think that was not only and I mean, they're kind of like my children, the students and the stories. I don't have a favorite, but I do think that was one of the most important, because it really was timely, and it came out around the 1-year anniversary. And not only that, it was among all of the stories that ran on The Nation by national journalists. It was one of the most popular stories of the day and of the week when it was published. So why are there so few programs like this? We were interviewed a lot by folks who were saying, like, this is a great program. This is a great way for, you all to center Black students' voices, to train them as journalists, and to chronicle these important things that are going on. Why are there so few? I mean, and some of those people who were interviewing us, I was like, you tell me, you're at a media house, you guys have resources, you have money, you need content, so why aren't y'all reaching out to students and having them write these kinds of stories? So one of the things that I think is important for all of us to know is that media has suffered a lot. Print media, newspapers where I have worked before, their circulations and even the number of pages are down significantly. The web is vast, but there's still monetary struggles there. But one of the things I think is important for all of you to know, even though we've done these partnerships with national media outlets, there are outlets, whether they be Black weekly newspapers, daily newspapers, or even alternative weeklies or bi-weeklies in your communities that always need content. They need content. So a lot of these places are having to not only lay off reporters, but use a lot of contract workers. So this is an opportunity. I think what we have done here is something that you can probably duplicate through your journalism schools, through whatever English storytelling departments that you have, because again, they always need content. And this is also a way for students to really be able to get involved and really use what they know. They can take their their lived experience and bring that to the page and really document what's going on with their cohort. And I guess I'll just wrap it up there because I feel like my time is really limited. But thank you, and if you have any questions for me, I'm totally open to them. Thank you so much.
Well, like Dr. Williams, I too have had the great pleasure of knowing Dr. Gunter for a very long time, although it's hard for me to call her Dr. Gunter. We all know her as Bingo. So Dr. Shaw, I'm going to use all 12 of my minutes, okay? All right, good. We were talking earlier about the relationships between town and GAM, between our universities and our communities, and I particularly want to talk to you in condensing what I was going to say about two experiences that I've had in that relation, in terms of that work and those relationships, particularly in terms of taking our work from the university into the community. And specifically, I want to talk about two incredible organizations, two of many in Mississippi I've had the great pleasure of working with, that are doing good work. The Mississippi Center for Justice and the Prison to College Pipeline, which was the first 4-credit college program in our state's prisons, founded just 5 years ago. by two wonderful faculty members, one Dr. Patrick Alexander at the University of Mississippi, and another Dr. Otis Pickett at Mississippi College. I can tell you that nothing has impacted me more than the first day I walked in to teach in our state's prisons at Parchment Penitentiary. That's an inauspicious place to walk into thinking that you're going to teach somebody something. It is fairly intimidating as well to walk in. Just to walk in the doors is intimidating in and of itself. But then to be in front of a room full of incarcerated men and women is a whole nother thing. I will tell you that in my experience, and kind of what I want to get at the heart of here, there are three general lessons that I'd like to pass along that I think I've gained from these experiences. And I will say the students I have met in prison are the best students I've ever had. Absolutely the best. For those of you who are faculty members, imagine a classroom where every student does all the reading, does all the work, comes to class prepared, and wants to engage class. 100% of them, right? And you have to be on your toes too. And these are also students who don't have access to the internet. They don't have access to computers. They got to write their papers by hand. You can't have office hours, so they can't come to you. They can't send you emails. They can't ask you questions. It's only the time you're in the prison with them where you get a chance to interact with them on any regular basis. And I will say there's no doubt I've gained much more from them in the 5 years I've now, this summer will be my 5th year, been teaching there than I think they've ever gained from anything I've ever taught them. And of those things, number one, prison is punishment. It's enough. Being in prison alone is punishment. If you don't think people are being punished enough by simply being in a prison, you haven't been in a prison in this country. In Mississippi, the Constitution of 1890, and I would say it's, I think, appropriate to be here in South Carolina, since Mississippi and South Carolina would lead the way in inventing Jim Crow for this country, particularly Mississippi with the Constitution of 1890, which invented poll taxes and literacy exams and residency requirements, all of which would be copied across the South as the Mississippi Plan. Also in those laws, in 1890 were a set of crimes that if you were convicted of would lead to a lifetime disfranchisement. They include today murder, rape, bribery, theft, arson, obtaining money or goods under false pretenses, perjury, forgery, embezzlement, and yes, bigamy. Those were seen in 1890 as being black crimes. And the debate around it in the Constitutional Convention of 1890, which is the Constitution we live under to this day in the state of Mississippi, was all about that fact. It was all about black disfranchisement and those specific crimes. The thing about those specific crimes that lead to a lifetime ban on voting is that they are the last piece of that Constitution of 1890 that's rooted in black disfranchisement. Poll taxes, literacy exams, residency requirements, those are all gone. But we still have today felony disfranchisement. I'm proud to say that this year I joined the Mississippi Center for Justice, a wonderful organization descended from a group out of the civil rights movement called the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights that did pro bono work for civil rights activists in the state of Mississippi. Joined them as an expert witness in a lawsuit against the state of Mississippi to end the practice of lifetime felony disfranchisement. Again, prison is punishment enough, and people who have paid their supposed debts to society deserve to have a say in the laws and elected officials who govern them. Which leads me to my second point about my experiences in Mississippi prisons. Incarcerated men and women are still men and women. They are still human beings. It is important that we see them. They deserve the same dignity you and I deserve. And it's important that we really see them as human beings who aren't forgotten or lost to that world behind bars. And I'm proud of the work in particular, I need to get my first image up here, that we did through the Margaret Walker Center, which I run at JSU, to bring the Smithsonian Traveling Poster Exhibition to the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility in Jackson. It's called A Place for All People. There you go, you can see one of the original images that are in the exhibit. It's about the history and work of the National Museum of African American History of Culture. We opened it in Central Mississippi Correctional Facility and installed this. It's just a poster exhibition. It's nothing particularly dazzling, but it is a poster exhibition. We opened it in Central Mississippi Correctional Facility so that the incarcerated men, women, and youth, yes, they have youth incarcerated there. They call it the Youthful Offenders Unit, YOU. so that they can learn more about the National Museum. But let me be clear here too, these people aren't just blank slates or deaf and dumb. They knew about the National Museum. They read newspapers when they can. They watch the news and hear about it. But they really wanted to learn more about the National Museum. And so we opened the exhibit with a gallery talk by my friend and Wayne Coleman's friend, Dr. Deborah Mack, Associate Director in the Office of Strategic Partnerships at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. She was introduced by the current chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities, Mr. John Peedy, a Mississippian whose father had one time been the attending physician in that prison. And let me say thanks to the Mississippi Humanities Council, our state Humanities Council, whose funding made that all happen. You can imagine the impact that that event had for the opening 50 incarcerated women sitting in an auditorium a little bit like this, and their ability to engage the chairman of NEH, the associate director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. They knew that we saw them, and that was important. And third, and finally, I'm down to 5 minutes, I'm doing good, all right? Make sure I get all 12. These people also have their own voices, and we need to listen to them and hear them. In so doing, I think we can get a slice of the human dignity back that they deserve that's been ripped away from them in prison. And I can tell you that, again, they are deeply grateful for this effort. I need to get the next image up. One of my students, Tara, had this picture. Had this picture drawn by her bunkmate for me as a token of gratitude. Because her bunkmate was not in my class and had never met me, she had to describe me to her so that she could draw this picture. You can imagine I treasure this, right? It's pretty good for someone who's never seen me. With that in mind, I want to read you 2 excerpts from essays written by 2 of the women who've been in my classes at Central Mississippi Correctional Facility. For the last 2 summers, I've been teaching at Central. It's just outside of Jackson. And last summer, I taught the second half U.S. History Survey, and the summer before that, I taught the first half U.S. History Survey to a group of about 25 women each summer. And I mentioned that the students I met in prison are the best I've ever had, and I respect each of them immensely, so let me say here that I do this with only their express permission to do so. In one assignment, I asked the students to write a personal reflection. I never ask students about the circumstances that lead them to prison. I don't think that's necessarily my business, but invariably they will talk about those experiences. Such was the case with Loretta, who grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast with parents who owned a shrimp boat. She wrote, "The first memory I have of anyone shooting a gun was when I was about 6 years old. I was on my daddy's 65-foot shrimp boat asleep in the cabin when I was awakened by the loud gunshots. When I got out of the bunk and rushed out the cabin, I saw my daddy holding a shotgun, aiming it into the water. When I asked him what he was doing, he told me they were shooting sharks off the nets because the sharks were ripping them with their teeth, trying to get at the shrimp and fish that were caught inside. I thought my daddy was the most amazing man in the world. The fact that he was at war with a shiver of sharks did not surprise me. In 3rd grade, I stood in front of my whole class and told them that my daddy was the chief of our Indian tribe. He spent the majority of my early childhood on the boat, working to provide for our family." Loretta went on to talk about her experiences growing up on that boat, living through Hurricane Camille. And quote, "When I was around 9 years old, my parents got rid of the boats and opened 2 seafood markets, one in Gulfport, one in Macomb. After school, we'd all work together as a family, the way we always had. My daddy ended up dying at the market in Macomb. My brother was the one who discovered his lifeless body at the age of 52. Mama, who's now 76, suffers from Alzheimer's and has been admitted to a nursing home. My brother John visits her daily, even while he supervises a construction company. It's his life's dream to buy a shrimp boat in the near future where we, along with our sons, can one day work hand in hand as a family once again. As for me, I carry with me every day the second memory of someone shooting a shotgun. Unfortunately, I was the one holding it. Sadly, I took a young woman's life. As a result, I've been in prison for almost 30 years, left to my own devices, battling sharks of a whole different breed." Makes me emotional. Then there's Mercedes. One last story. Mercedes was in my first half U.S. History Survey, in which we read Margaret Walker's Jubilee. Jubilee, Margaret Walker's great Civil War era novel. If you're interested in historical fiction, it's one of the best ever. It's about the experiences of Margaret's very real great-grandmother and grandmother living from slavery to freedom. Mercedes was moved by the connections between her experiences incarcerated in Mississippi and those of Viree, the main character in Jubilee. Let me tell you, when you teach slavery to incarcerated people, they fully understand that the 13th Amendment leaves a large loophole that allows them to still be enslaved in this country. Quote, Mercedes wrote, "Being able to attend 2 history college courses in the past year has educated me about my own current condition. I guess I never connected the bridge that slavery's echoed in America through the prison system still today. You told us not to recount this book to you. You already know it. Instead, I'll tell you the common ground I've discovered in my personal life through the reading of Margaret Walker's Jubilee. Viree's story has touched me and moved me far more than I expected. To be a black Southern slave woman in 19th century America is not so far removed from being a Southern woman prisoner in 21st century America. The parallels of the interior world of Viree through slavery into emancipation are astonishing to me as I look at the past 20 years of my own life and try to foresee what lies ahead as a free woman in my near possible future. As a present day society, the belief is that slavery no longer exists. Being a ward of the state, and I'm almost done, this is the last one. Being a ward of the state held in contemporary enslavement, however, I beg to differ. Like Viree, in today's world, I've been labeled a social pariah. The difference is being she for the era in which she was so unfortunately born and the stain attached upon a race by society. Myself, the stain of being a murderer. The stigmas attached with both, rather in bondage or freedom, will continue to follow you the remainder of your life. The similarities in the daily struggles Viree faced as a slave are struggles I can relate to. The bondage, the being held against my will without a choice in the matter. Fighting a battle in a war for freedom that seems endless with no light at the end of my tunnel. I can associate with the oppression of an unfair environment, laws, and circumstances controlling both forms of slavery. The realities of slavery then are not so contrasting as the realities in prison today. The daily degradation, the attempts to lower morale, both conditions leave you with no say in the simple task of your everyday natural human rights. When to sleep, when to wake up, when to shower, you must ask for permission to go to the bathroom. You're threatened with violence. Oftentimes this violence is carried out. Group punishments are issued in the form of being sprayed with a form of pepper spray that's so potent you feel your throat closing in, you can't breathe, you feel moments away from death. They, quote, paralyze you with a fear far greater than you can imagine. They keep the upper hand. There's nothing more miserable as a human than to be controlled on all fronts by another human. The goal seems to be dehumanization. It tries to take a part of who you are. Living a life of bondage, though, shows you that what you are made of and capable of. The analogies between slavery and prison are plentiful, the connections ever present. Parts of Viree and myself I can see in each other. Mercedes is now 43 years old. She's been in prison for the past 25 years. In 2017, I was approached by the Innocence Project, which had agreed to take on her case and seek a new trial. They asked me to write a letter of support and be willing to testify for her in court, both of which I was happy to do, although I never ended up appearing in court. It turns out that the doctors whose testimony was responsible for putting her in prison 25 years ago has recanted and has now claimed that it was all based on bad science. There's no way she could have done what she's been accused of. Mercedes has recently had her new trial. With any luck, she may be released. Yeah, thank you.
Those who have these on their row, please take it off the end of the row. Take one of the items inside, pass it. And let's keep these passing as long as I'm talking.
We are the ones that we're waiting for. We are the ones that we're waiting for. Look around you. Who looks familiar? Who looks different? Who are you attracted to? I'm going to take you on a religious journey. We'll call it the Clemson University Pilgrimage of Truth-Telling and Remembrance. This idea is based on some unusual partnerships. One of the goals I have for talking to you today is to encourage you to look at partnerships that exist that you may not think of as partnerships. Who's in the world that attracts your attention, doing work you think is really important? I came to Clemson University in 2014 as a senior citizen student. Here in South Carolina, I heard if you're 60 or over, you can take a free class every semester. A free class. I later learned that you don't have to take it for a grade. I'll just say briefly that all of my education here in the state of South Carolina, from 2 years old to 18 years old, was completely done by white people, with white people. I was well educated as a white person. One decision I made when I had a chance to take any class I wanted was to take classes from people of the global majority, not white. The first class I took was from this woman, Rhonda Robinson Thomas. Anybody know Dr. Thomas? Yeah. If you ever have a chance to meet and hear her speak, go. She came to Clemson in 2007 as a first-year academic. African American literature is her field. But what she has done is investigate the life of African Americans at Clemson University, going way back, as early as she can find. Her project, Call My Name, is on Facebook. If you're a Facebook follower, go get on her list. She didn't say pilgrimage of truth-telling and remembrance. No. My church, which is located in Clemson and is a United Church of Christ, open and affirming it's called, which means our arms are open wide for everyone. We say God loves you no matter who you love. Said we want to do our part in ending racism. This period on this symposium is to tell you about projects, and I'm hoping help you see I could do a project like that. It doesn't have to look just like that. I know somebody, Rhonda Thomas. I'm a white ally. I'm sure I'm speaking to a few other white allies. I can tell the history. It just so happens that I came from Emory University, where I had 6 years of working on a project in which Emory engaged its community in the race history of that institution. In fact, I met Rhonda Thomas in 2011 at Emory at a conference I was helping put together called Slavery in the University, Histories and Legacies. There might be people in this room who were there. When I knew I was going to move to South Carolina And when I became a student at Clemson, I said, I can be an ally. I can tell the stories. And I'm not alone. I wrote a proposal with a faculty member, Pam Mack, to tell some of the history that my friend Rhonda Thomas has unearthed and begun to tell. The proposal that was given a grant, Pilgrimage of Remembrance, is a plan to walk the campus. We proposed that we would take up to 30 students. We only got 17 on the first round. We proposed that they would be from 3 different campus ministries, Christian ministries, thinking Christian students would be willing to look across difference. We went into places on campus that are relatively hidden. I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute. These are not places that many students go. Not like the Horseshoe here, where you walk all the time. We wanted people to walk. I will tell you, the first pilgrimage of truth-telling and remembrance was greeted with rain. One student wrote on an evaluation, the rain helped. Now, it didn't help us, the organizers. We had to cut some of our plan. But maybe that student saw that going slowly, standing in God's tears, was part of the impact. Here's the map. This is a map of our campus. What would the map of your area be? And what kind of places might you be able to take people and engage them, whether in a spiritual journey like a pilgrimage or in some other method? As you see, let's see if I can make this pointer. I tried to point out the places we ended up. We walked this part, but we had to ride the rest of it to stay out of the rain. It was familiar territory, but unfamiliar places. Let's go on a journey. Let's go on a pilgrimage. Come with me. We've ridden to this spot. We're standing, looking out over the water by the Seneca River. In 1776, as the Liberty Bell was ringing, calling for liberty and freedom, a Seneca, a large Cherokee village that was located along the Seneca River, was being destroyed. When settlers from Europe arrived, Native Americans did their best to adapt and make space. Treaties were signed, always broken. Thus, the Cherokee were pushed off this land. Homes were uprooted. Today, we remember broken treaties, broken promises, broken homes. We also remember a resilient people who were profoundly spiritual and who lived with the land. We remember that each day began with a journey to the river. As we did this, we offered water. Water to cleanse, water to touch yourself, water to cast out. And it was with each of the stops that we gave an example of what was there, and we connected in some spiritual way to that place. So I will show you some of our other stops. Oops. Great. So just up the hill from that spot is this one, overlooking a huge agricultural field. Do you have it in your hand? Do you have either a cotton ball or a cotton bowl? Who has cotton bowls? The actual, yeah, good. So here we look over the field. A Seneca had been here first, but this was the Fort Hill Plantation growing area where the profit from King Cotton rested on the backs of enslaved Africans. 129 lived on this plantation. And I haven't said this, Clemson University is built on the plantation of John C. Calhoun and Florrie Calhoun. And from them, their daughter inherited it, Anna Calhoun Clemson. She married Thomas Clemson. So right in the middle of our campus is the plantation house. Next, we went to the cemetery. Doesn't look like a cemetery. Up on the hill are the cemetery monuments that would look like any cemetery you might go into. Down on the bottom is this area. We call it Cemetery Hill, the slave section. This is where everyone knows the slaves were buried. Well, okay. So I'll just say in closing, this is one group's idea. What is your idea? What might you be able to do? And I'd like to close by asking you to say with me this phrase. I can make a significant difference
a significant difference
in any situation.
in any situation.
Let's do that again. I can make a significant difference
Make a significant difference
in any situation.
in any situation.
Go do it.
Good morning again to everyone. My name again is Robert Reinhardt, and I guess I'll do what you said, Dr. Shaw. I'm Director of Admissions for the University of South Carolina School of Medicine, and I also serve as Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion. I've worked at the School of Medicine for about 5 years overseeing the admissions process. So I oversee the process of students actually applying to medical school. Additionally, I have an appointment in the area of neuropsychiatry as an assistant professor. I struggled when I initially got the invitation to come and identify a specific area that I wanted to speak about today. The struggle was that, number one, I didn't think that you guys wanted to hear about some of the technical things I deal with as a part of the admissions process. Number two, I wasn't totally sure as to the audience that I will have to actually speak to. So it wasn't until I was just sitting here listening to the presentations of other persons that it really kind of clicked with me that some of the things that I probably would like to share with you. This past week, I attended the Association of Medical Colleges conference in Austin, Texas. It was attended by 4,600 medical school representatives from across the country. There are approximately 104 traditional MD medical schools in the United States. One of the biggest topics of conversations at this particular conference was issues dealing with diversity, inclusion, and access. Diversity and inclusion specifically as it relates to the admissions process for medical schools. Contrary to popular belief, medical school is not about who is the smartest student. medical school is not about the student who makes the highest MCAT score. Too often, students are restricted in the application process because they think, well, I don't have the best grade point average, then maybe I won't be the best competitive student. I didn't make the best score on my MCAT, so that's gonna restrict me from being the best medical student. That's not always the case. Schools across the United States are suffering because the number of African American and other underrepresented minorities are not reflective of the populations of those states in medicine. If you look at South Carolina has approximately a 28% population of African Americans. If you look at the 2010 census. If you look at the population of medical schools in South Carolina, as far as the students, we are far away from the 28%. South Carolina Hispanic population is approximately 5%. If you look at the population of Hispanics in medical schools in South Carolina, it's far less than 5%. So at this particular conference, we talked about what are some of the things that medical schools can do to increase the population of physicians that we will have in the future, number one. Number two, what can we do as medical schools to enhance the experience of non-minority students so they can better serve the population of physicians, the populations of patients that they will be serving down the road. There are approximately 10 different sessions at this particular conference that focus on those particular issues. I thought that I would give you just a snapshot of the medical school process at the University of South Carolina because it mirrors the medical school process of many medical schools across the country. Medical schools, number one, is highly competitive. This past year, we had approximately 4,800 students to apply. Of the 4,800 students who applied, we interviewed approximately 400. Of the 400 students we interviewed, we had a class of 100 to begin in the fall of 2018. So again, 4,800 students applied, 400 students were selected for the interview. And of the 400 students who were interviewed, we started with a class of 100 students in the fall. So highly, highly competitive. The challenge is, traditionally, medical schools have focused primarily on the numbers. But the numbers do not tell the entire story. I'm going to tell you a brief snapshot of a couple applicants that will be nameless. The first applicant, in the majority of his elementary and early childhood education, he was in special education classes. He did not have access to health care. So as a 5th grade student, he was tested for his hearing ability. As it turns out, he had a hearing deficiency. But throughout his early childhood and the majority of his elementary education years, he was in special education classes, and we know what happens with special education students. They get labeled. Many times they are picked on by their peers, their quote-unquote friends, their classmates. And once he got his hearing diagnosed, he went from being from a student who was failing courses and not doing well to a student who started making A's. So he transitioned to high school, was a straight A student. He transitioned to college, and he graduated with 3.9 grade point average. And because of his experiences in elementary school, because of his non-diagnosis as far as having a hearing issue in comparison to having an issue related to special education, he was motivated to pursue a career in medicine. And when he came to interview with us, we asked him, because we read in his personal statement, and reading personal statements is one of the things that I enjoy most about my job, because I can get into the insight as to why medicine has selected this person or why this person has selected medicine. So he kind of introduced this whole story to me as a part of his personal statement. And he said his desire is to make a difference in the lives of others based upon his experiences as being misdiagnosed. This student did not have the best MCAT score, but because of the challenges that he faced, we believe that he has something uniquely to share as a physician that will impact students like himself from rural communities in our state and nation. Student 1. Student 2. The student's parents both worked. The father was diagnosed with cancer. As a result of the cancer diagnosis, the parents eventually lost their home. The father passed. The student, the mother, and the youngest sibling did not have a place to stay. For more than a year and a half, the family resided in a car, did not reach out to people within the elementary school nor the high school that the student attended because they were afraid of being labeled as homeless persons. The student goes on to say that she was able to make it to college based upon eventually the guidance counselor finding out and offering resources and offering scholarships that will help her transition to college. But once she got to college, the story wasn't over. She worked 30 hours or more each of her years in college to help provide financial support for her younger sibling and her mom. Because of her desire to work and support her family, she did not have the best grade point average, but she had a superior work ethic that we saw, and she had what we thought that would be needed to be a successful physician. She is someone who was offered admissions, and we were fortunate enough to offer her an underrepresented minority scholarship to help support her financial ability in medical school. I share these two stories because medical schools across the country are struggling with this whole idea of how can and do we diversify the availability of physicians for the population of the future. Many would have us to believe that you should only look at the numbers. But if you only look at the numbers, then you will not be able to provide the physicians who will be successful in addressing the needs of the population that they will serve. Because the truth be told, the people that physicians serve will be totally different than the group of people who are sitting within this room. We believe that if we look at some of the other things, that we can attract and produce physicians that will be able to better serve the population because they have some of those similar experiences. every medical student does not have challenges. Let me go ahead and say that. We have some medical students that don't have those challenges. But as a medical school, we still have to provide them with the things that they need to be successful in serving the population that they serve. So at our School of Medicine, we are in the process of redesigning our curriculum, and we are implementing specific things related to the social determinants of health, which is a real hot button topic today. And so what I hope is by having forums as these, that we will become not only educated about what are some of the issues that impact healthcare, that impact the beliefs of people today. It does no good to just get the information and not to share it with others. So we have to get this information and be willing to share it with others. A couple of partnerships quickly, I know my time is up, but a couple of partnerships that we are doing also. We have a medical legal partnership at the School of Medicine where our School of Medicine students are actually working with law students to help address and deal with real life situations involving access to health care for persons associated with the Children's Hospital here at Palmetto Health Richland. We also, again, with our medical school redesigning our curriculum, we are exposing students early on as first and second year medical students instead of just doing their third and fourth clinical years. So we really are trying to get them into the whole idea of when you're looking at a patient, there are other reasons why they may not be doing what you tell them or instruct them to do as far as, eating right. Maybe they live in a food desert that they don't have access to a grocery store or supermarket that provides healthy food. We tell them that, well, you should exercise. Well, maybe they don't have a gym, so instead of telling them to go to the gym, maybe you should give them some other options beyond going to the gym. So we're trying to do a better job, as well as medical schools across the country. We're trying to better prepare students for the population and some of the issues that the populations have in the future and of today. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you to our panelists for such wonderful presentations and both in what you conveyed and what it will spark in our conversation. So my apologies for having been the rude person in the room with the timer. We are now going to move into our Q&A, and I'm not going to time the Q&A, but you have a hard, fast sort of boundary that lunch is next. So I'm going to ask, what we'll do is I'm going to just ask in the interest of time, but also of still having some dialogue. I'm going to ask if we can have at least 3 questions in a row. And then we'll take 3 questions, if you could please. 3 questions in a row, and then we're going to have the panelists respond. And for an engagement, at least for the next 10 minutes, to do a little bit of unpacking, but we'll have more time subsequently. So if there are 3 individuals who would like to offer questions or... Okay. So we'll do 3 questions and then have the panel respond.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to the panelists. My question is for Dr. Williams. It seems like an incredibly dynamic program that you all did. And it kind of, I'm a millennial, but my niece, who's about 10 years younger than me, is this Generation Z. And her experience is completely different from mine in lots of ways. And so I think it's really brilliant to chronicle the differences and the experiences of Black students on college campuses. I know that you said that your model is one that could be replicated, but I'm thinking, why not have like state chapters or in a national conference to bring these students together, and then have different local chapters or local branches that can stem from the state, because I think this is a dynamic program. So if you could talk maybe a little bit about that, establishing this as a nationwide project on kind of a statewide and a local level.
Okay, Dr. Williams. Williams has that question. Okay, second question, please. Thank you, Dr. Gunter.
Good morning and thank you for panelists. I was wondering, all of these issues we were discussing, I think need a political will to do something about all those, about healthcare, access to free education. And we just had midterm election, only 53% participate, especially among young generation, the percentage was much lower. So how we will tackle all these problems with having political impact in terms of the power on one party, or we have two-party system with electoral college. The system, to me, I've been living in the United States for 32 years. It seems to me so complicated in terms of electing a president, and doesn't make any sense. I mean, so I'm learning history from my kids, but it doesn't make sense. I mean, we are living in, for example, 1800 based on Constitution, and the law changed. I'm from country, we have 6,000 years history, but we're not living past 6,000 years. So,
To all about civic and political engagement. Third question.
Thanks, everybody. I'm just sitting here trying to figure out if I can make my question specific enough to be reasonable, but I'll just throw it out there. So I teach here at the University of South Carolina. I've taught here for a long time, really active in the university in a number of different ways, and I was struck by the ways in which, with the exception of the last speaker, a lot of these projects are kind of, they're university linked, but they're also moving beyond the university. And so I'm just wondering, I sit on various committees and things, and we have this enormous undergraduate research institution that we're trying to diversify and make more inclusive. And I'm just wondering if people have idea, this is just so huge, but the small projects are easier to get your brain around, and they're not small, they're all big in their ways, but this very specific thing. I'm just wondering, and I don't know if Susan Glisson is here, because I thought about her last night talking about Mississippi, but if there's thoughts or suggestions about thinking about some of these things at the level of the university and within the university as well. I mean, I know this because this is the university panel, because it's such a huge and complicated structure, and we face so many challenges, including the political challenge. And so I just don't know if anybody has any wisdom to just start talking about that.
Great. So Dr. Williams, why don't you go first, and then I think the other two questions were addressed to all of them.
Okay, and I'll try to go quickly in the interest of time, but one thing that I will say is that I do think it would be a great idea to have Black on Campus to be a national project with student chapters, but I will be honest in saying that this was a lot of work. It was a lot of work because, again, when we did this the first time, we had a partnership with L.com, and we had 5 students. But I was working at Wake Forest University then, and all of the students that we were working with were at the university. So the students got credit, and we were able to meet with them weekly, and I was able to, we're all logistically in the same place, so it was easier to do. But then next year, and then we did a project on squad care, which is basically like this whole concept of taking care of collective care as opposed to the commodified and commercialized self-care, right? So what we wanted to do the following year, this year, was to do something like a little bit more newsy and concrete and chronicle Black college students' experiences Black on campus. But because we had students from across the country, this was very difficult because, see, now keep in mind that there are 2 of us doing this. Melissa Harris Perry was at the time running the Pro Humanitate Institute at Wake Forest. She was running the Anna Julia Cooper Center at Wake Forest, teaching her classes, and also on the public speaking circuit. Sherry Williams had just started her first year of a tenure track position at American University and was teaching classes, right? And also trying to conduct research. So this was a lot of work. So doing this project was really like an additional, not 1, but maybe 1.5 or 2 classes for me. So I think something like this can be duplicated individually, and I think there could possibly be a network of this, but it would take like a lot of infrastructure and resources in terms of financial resources and human resources that I personally don't have, because honestly, Melissa is doing another project this semester that kicked off this semester called Reporting Across the Divide, and it's going to be about students reporting about immigration. But I am not able to be involved in this project at all because, I mean, I'm on a tenure track. So my journalism stories that I write don't have the same weight as scholarly journal articles. So if I continue to spend like 20 hours a week outside of my regular work doing this and not getting out the research, then that puts me in jeopardy in my own career trajectory. So, I mean, this is something that I would like to do more of, and something that I think is really necessary. But I just think that if there is going to be something like this happen on a national level, it is going to take a coalition and a strong team, and also some resources, because the nation invested some money into this too, because like I said, we got folks from the Ida B. Wells Society to work with us, and so I mean it costs money to fly them down to North Carolina. It costs money to, you know, get them there and to do that work. And you know, we took students to New York City for a conference, for a National Student Journalism Conference there. We brought them down to North Carolina because the cohort was across the country, and then we had these video meetings weekly, but they needed to actually be together. So, I mean, it's a lot of money and a lot of resources that needs to be planned out. But if people are interested in doing this kind of thing, Melissa did get a grant from ONA, the Online News Association, that is actually funding the project that she's doing now. But I'm really not a part of it because I'm on the tenure track and I have to get out of some research.
Yeah, real considerations and real constraints. Okay. Yeah. And so yes, yeah, feel free. Yeah.
I'm just going to take this off. It may be easier for us to pass it this way. So the second two questions, I'll go relatively quickly. As for the first with the political work, I think the most effective work we can all do right now, especially in this climate, isn't thinking that somehow we're going to change the Trump era, but to begin local and begin in our communities, begin doing work right where we are, and we all have work to do right where we are. And we can vote. I mean, we can encourage people to vote and keep voting. I'm happy to work with a national nonprofit called Common Cause that's put fellows on college campuses across the country. I have one of their fellows, a junior political science major at Jackson State, who's working with me on voter registration, get out the vote, and college student voter issues on campus. We have them in Mississippi at Jackson State, University of Southern Mississippi, and Millsaps College. At Jackson State, the students who live in our dorms, we have a voting precinct on campus, so they can register and vote in the student union. Which is powerful, so we're working that. And I would say too, one thing that gives me hope in this nation, and in Mississippi especially, because we can change Mississippi, we can change the rest of this world. Under the age of 18, brown and black people make up the majority of our population in the state of Mississippi. Under the age of 18 right now. So well within our lifetimes, there's a sea change coming. We got to make sure those people know how to engage the political process. The second question, just real quick, I fully believe that the work, particularly that I've done in prisons, is part and parcel of the work that I'm supposed to do as a tenured history professor at Jackson State, as a public employee in the state of Mississippi who teaches history. And I'm lucky enough to have administrators who support me in that work that I do. I fully believe that access to the highest quality education possible is our #1 civil rights issue of the day. And that means access to all people, anywhere and everywhere they can get it. I like to say to folks, none of us can do everything to change this world, but all of us can do something, and all of us can do a little bit more. So I'll stop there.
Great.
I want to specifically address the issue of the political issue. You know, advocacy is so very, very important. One of the things that I was struck when I first joined the School of Medicine and getting involved with the AAMC is that they have taken a stance on issues related to the Affordable Care Act. Because we as persons in medical education and as physicians, etc., we are at the very ground level of what happens when persons do not have access to health care. If you don't have access to health care, then your life is so much more difficult than persons who have access. It destroys families, families that have been healthy families prior to losing their health care. And so at the AAMC conference, again with the 4,600 representatives there last week, we renewed our commitment to lobbying and doing whatever is possible to ensure that what's left of the Affordable Care Act will remain. And we will also continue to try to educate people, politicians, whomever will listen, that access to health is one of the most important issues that we face in addition to education in these United States. I was disheartened by the results personally of the elections, but I was also disheartened even more by finding out the number of people who did not actually vote because they felt that their votes did not matter. My church actually sponsored rides for people to go to the polls. And last night I was meeting with some of the guys who provided the transportation, and they were telling me, well, you know, the female came out the house, but the young 20-year-old said that he didn't think his vote would make a difference. We have too many cases where our young males, specifically black males, are not taking advantage of voting. And we have to somehow empower them with the knowledge that you can't get a seat at the table unless you participate.
I'll answer my part of the third question. Anyone who's been on this campus for a year or more has access to something here that can make a difference. You have equity and inclusion, if that's close to the right term. Look for pockets of funding. Our grant was $2,500, which is a lot of money. You can do lots with that much money. There were several of them given away. You can find places. I've done some presidential level work at institutions. The other thing I would say is it does take institutional will to do hard work. That doesn't always have to be at the presidential level. It does help if it is.
Really quickly, because I just want to use one example too. So when I was getting my PhD and also my master's degree at Syracuse University in upstate New York, one thing that the university did, particularly the Newhouse School, was they started this publication called The Stand, because we know that across the country there are neighborhoods where there are food deserts, right? But because of everything that's been going on with the economy and news, there are pockets and communities where there are news deserts too. Like there are some communities that don't have a daily newspaper anymore, and there are some newspapers that are pretty much, if you go in a newsroom, it looks like it's like a skeleton, because like there are plenty of desks but no one works there. So and then we know that communities of color, and particularly black people, have been maligned and been distorted and not necessarily captured in media in ways that they should. So the university started this publication. It is a community publication called The Stand, and it's housed at the university, and they fund it, but the people in the community are the reporters. So that is the university using its resources, because Syracuse is one of the top journalism schools in the country, so they have resources, cameras, studios that are on par with any small or mid-sized market. So they are actually using the resources in the community and at the university and bringing them to the community. So whether it is a research project, when you get grants to do research, you can do research that will bring the assets of the university to the community.
Each of our panelists gave what I thought was a 12-minute keynote address, and so we really do appreciate what you've offered. You do not have